I like to start a lot of my talks with these two images from my journal in 1994, and then we got our first computer that came with a spool printer, which was a big deal the year after. And I start with these two images, not because they were the greatest things I've ever made, obviously, but because when people ask me about my art practice and about what I do, I think these two images sort of speak a lot to sort of what my practice has now become. For a long time, I thought I was going to take Jack Hanna's job at the Columbus Zoo, but I also always wanted to be an artist. And a lot of my practice has to do with looking at these different systems of animals and nature, and how technology that we use on a day-to-day basis interacts with those things, and how we use that, and then how I use that in my practice is what I will talk about today. So I'm really interested, like Mona said, in these sort of lines between humans, technology, and nature, and what those mean when they're together. Today I'm going to show my presentation a little bit different, and I'm going to start with new pieces that actually haven't been shown to anyone yet. They're going to be in a show opening a week from tomorrow in Chicago. So these pieces actually haven't ever been installed, so you guys are sort of my test audience, so to speak. They've been shown in some form. There is one piece that hasn't been shown at all. So I'm going to start with brand new work. Did anybody go to Aurora this year besides Kyle, maybe? Just Kyle. I was in Aurora, Dallas this year, which is an event that happens downtown where there are a lot of artists that do projection and performance-based pieces. And this is part of a version of what I showed at Aurora, and it's called Around We Go, DFW, and this is version number 2. I'm really interested in pests and insects as pests, and also the human being as a pest. I'm a self-admitted misanthrope. I think that we're probably eventually going to destroy ourselves, but I also think that there's a lot of systems that already exist that we could look at as far as solutions go as well. So I'm really interested in using pests as partners in a lot of my pieces. Around We Go is a piece where I used termites, and this is sort of a view from Aurora. It's that little teeny white box, where I'm looking at sort of their behavioral patterns based on the DFW, a sketch of the DFW highway system. So essentially, depending on what type of pen you're using to create these sketches, the smell of that pen either signals a warning pheromone to them or a following pheromone. So this is a piece that's it's a really quick piece that sort of commentates on our sort of systems that we follow, and how these termites might follow a similar system if they were to make their own sort of highway. And I will scrub through some of these just to give you a sort of view of that. So again, this is a piece that I haven't shown yet, but we'll be showing soon. I showed this as a larger projection, and I'm planning on making a series of these that exist that look at a bunch of cities and how termites use these cities, because you'll notice that after a while they quit following the lines. And it's one, because the smell is gone, but two, if the path is too complicated, they also won't follow it. So it's a new study that I'm working on, looking at emergence and transportation patterns between humans and these sort of smaller superorganisms. I'm also working on a series of pieces that have to do with hashtags and Twitter. I'm not a major Twitter user. I will say that I am a Facebook junkie, though. But Twitter is something that I'm still getting used to, and something that I find really interesting is this sort of, even more than Facebook, this place that you just sort of blast out all of your sort of feelings. It's your like one-line journal about your life every day. So I've been working with a series of these sort of kitsch plants that you can buy. I don't know if anybody's ever seen these. They're called the magic message plant. It's something you can buy at like hospital gift shops and nature museum gift shops. It's a gift shop sort of toy. And essentially, I've been working with this company to have all of the top hashtags from each year of Twitter's year in review etched into this seed, and then I'm essentially growing tweets. I'm interested in thinking about what it means, how long it takes nature to grow a sort of message in this way, and also if it's possible to then crossbreed these things to make new hashtags, which is something that I'm still trying to figure out. Because this is a physical-based thing, it's not genetic at this point. It's not something that I'm able to do, but the idea is that you can then create an entirely new garden of these sort of hybrid tweets and hashtags, which is essentially what we are doing as a society, or those that use Twitter are doing every single day. The lights that you see up top are also controlled by the amount of times this hashtag for that seat has been tweeted to Twitter. So a lot of my pieces deal with physical computing and are code-based, and this is using a line of code that I've written that basically scans Twitter for these hashtags, which these are all hashtags that are the top hashtags for a year. And so the life of these plants is also dependent on how often this tweet is being, or this hashtag is being updated. So you can get a sense of how these sort of exist. And I'm ideally wanting to plant like sort of small gardens and crops. The next piece I'm going to show you is the one I'm most reluctant to show. And it's completely new in some ways. So I'm going to be, for the first time, debuting what I'm calling Twitter Roach, which is a Twitter-controlled cockroach. Essentially, anyone in the world, at any place, at any sort of Twitter name, can access my cockroach and essentially control it neurologically. So this isn't bugs that are being controlled by electronics, or these sort of drone-based bugs are nothing new. The military has been investigating these things for the last decade. People at home have now started to make these things, and the piece is mostly about consumerism. There are all sorts of buzzes and whistles in this place. Essentially, my piece is using all consumer-based things, so things that you can buy. There's nothing special about this circuit. This is actually a kit that you can buy. Has anybody seen the Hex bug at Target? They're a toy. They're in the kids section, yeah. The way this works, there's a company called Backyard Brains, and their whole bend is that they're introducing neuroscience to anyone. If you're interested in neuroscience, you can get some of their kits, use a cockroach as sort of your platform for testing. And they provide schools and universities with these kits. They're a really great group. However, they've just recently introduced what they call Robo-Roach. And Robo-Roach is a little tiny backpack that essentially uses the inside of a hex bug, and then you wire it to a cockroach. And so I'm interested in what it means to let sort of society have access to all of these things as their own sort of toy or experiment. So I've created Twitter Roach, which it's not live yet, but soon it will exist in its own sort of clean container where it doesn't have a lot of space. In its first version, this is sort of the beta version. And you can tweet at Twitter Roach. But something that I am more interested in, besides this idea of control, is also if the cockroach is able to unlearn. In a way that we're now so learned into what it means, what a hashtag means. I was looking at an article about Twitter, and there was an article that says things you need to know about Twitter, and it sits down and gives you a definition of like, what is a hashtag? What does it mean to mention someone? What does it mean to be trending? And I'm wondering what it means for something like a cockroach to be embedded with this sort of technology right away, and that can it unlearn those sort of commands, or these commands that are being sent to it? Because these are just small, like micropulses. I'm not like, sending 12 volts to this bug. It's just a watch battery amount. So it's not something it's just enough to sort of shock its nervous system to steer itself around. However, I think that if I were to keep sort of breeding these same cockroaches, I wonder if they could sort of unlearn responding to this sort of attack on their nervous system via Twitter. For sort of the nerd approach, I will show you guys just a little bit of how this works. I like to show a little bit of my back-end code stuff. So it's as simple as sending a mention to the Twitter Roach, which, believe it or not, the name Twitter Roach was already taken. So I don't know who out there is ruining my game, but it's now called Tweet Roach, and you just send it commands via hashtag. It dumps into a computer-generated coding system that, again, is all open source. This is something that every part of this is anything that anyone in this room can access. It sends it to this open source coding program called processing. At the very bottom, it says that it's received the tweet. And then this is a really bad iPhone video. Like I said, I haven't shown these yet. Once it does that, this is just sort of, that's the little backpack. You can see that light go off, and it then just controls the cockroach from that little backpack. It sends a little pulse to the cockroach's antenna. So that's Twitter Roach. It's going to go live on December 7th. So get your phones out and you can send it a tweet.
Can I just ask, when you
Yeah.
say it controls the cockroach,
Mm-hmm.
is it doing anything more than just giving it a jolt? I mean, is it actually like rewarding it if it goes right, or?
Right. That's sort of the idea for the next version. Right now it is literally just giving it a pulse. It's just giving it a pulse to each one of its antennas that essentially control whether it goes left or whether it goes right. But there's no reward system in play yet. There's also only going to be a single cockroach in this enclosure, so there's no sort of way for them to start to interact with another one and see what that also might mean. So it's still very, very new. It's more of an experiment at this point, but yeah, that's a good question though. And one of the last new pieces I'm going to talk about, and these are sort of the models for this piece, is a piece called One Time Through, where I'm using, and you'll see this in some of my other pieces, I'm using butterflies or chrysalis before they're actually a butterfly, and they're what people mistakenly call them, their sort of cocoon state. Cocoons are only moths. When they're in their chrysalis state, they're essentially attached to these sensors. This is more of a metaphorical piece about the moment of sort of entry into this new existence. These are all butterflies that I order from a biological supplier, so their entire life cycle is sort of, in a way, false. It's not real. They're not from nature. They're bred in this sort of lab. And their moment of sort of being in their final stage, they're attached to this sensor, and essentially as they emerge from their cocoon, the sound of that is recorded and then looped throughout the space. And they'll hatch in the gallery, and then after about 2 weeks, they'll end up dying, and the last thing left is that sound that they created in space. So the piece is a lot about, what you leave behind, or how you affect a space when you're in a space or your environment, and what it means to sort of exist in that space. And then leave it relatively abruptly. They only live in this space for about 2 weeks, so they're sort of left with this sort of orchestra of their sound of hatching. So what it will look like, it's a little dark. There's a little tiny chrysalis on this one, and there's a speaker underneath here. But they exist in these artificial steel structures that are supposed to resemble a cocoon in some sort of form. And again, I took this morning because I was really excited to give you an idea of what's going to trigger that sound. It's a very small amount of energy, but that amount of energy is really important to me. I mean, this is how they enter the world, and it's a really important moment for the butterfly. So this tiny little motion is what's going to control this orchestra of sound. About an hour before I came here, if I can find my mouse, one hatched on my desk. We missed it. But this will happen so fast, and there's also a chance that there won't be any humans present. So their existence may only also be known by the sound. And I think we think about a lot of these sort of pests and insect. Obviously, butterflies aren't generally considered a pest-based insect, but I think there's a lot of instances in nature where we sort of forget that these things also exist. So their mark is really left by the sound that they generate in the space. I maybe paused it. Oh, I did. I'm going to talk about some pieces that are in the past. Like I said, I'm very much interested in pests and pest-based systems and what it means to be a pest. I think of myself as a pest every single day. And I think about what it means to live with things that we consider pests. So I keep all of these things in my home. This is a piece called Partnered, We Are All Pests. It's essentially a 9 by 9 foot floor that people are meant to gather around, and inside of this floor that's made of pine are containers of termites. And the idea is that the government a couple years ago had put out this single line of text, and you can still find it on like the Department of Energy's website, that a single termite, if it eats one piece of computer paper, can produce 2 liters of hydrogen gas. So I got really fixated on this idea of termites eating my paper waste to produce gas. Gas that's usable for me and for you, and how might we use these things as a partner to solve some of our energy problems. And this was more of a metaphorical gesture towards that, but essentially the floor was this space that you could walk on and watch them eat these little structures that were made from my paper waste. And the floor itself is one giant speaker, and you listen to them sort of deconstruct all of this waste. And I just continuously kept feeding them all of this waste. And I'll show you sort of a quick video of some things. Obviously a little bit more of a staged interaction. I want to get to the point where it won't let me scrub. We'll watch some of it. Underneath this floor also there were tunnels so that the termites could choose to walk from one container to the other. Each one was filled with a different type of recyclable, like paper waste. One is a pizza box, one is all of my gas bills and electric bills, and another one is newspapers. I'll show you another version where I fed them my original birth certificate. My parents were thrilled. They were really happy. So to give you an idea, they sort of, these mounds are to represent their natural structures, so what their structures look like in the real world. And they sort of live in these spaces and just eat away at them for long durations. And then there's a microphone that's a special frequency microphone to be able to hear that sound of them chewing through paper. So I'm using vibrating resonators to turn the actual surface into a speaker. So there's no speakers built into this thing. The plane of wood itself is, there's an element that vibrates it that produces the sound on that platform. So that when you put your face to it, you're really sort of hearing that vibration. But what's interesting to me about this piece too is that it really became more of a gathering site, and people were also forced in a way to kind of get down into this position that puts you at more of a level with the termite also, which is something that's really important to me. Instead of, I will show a lot of pieces that are microscopic and macro and a lot of different shifts, but In this case, it was important for me to ask the viewer to sort of position themselves in a way that they're sort of lowly like the termite at this sort of floor position, or the way that we as humans think of the termite generally. I also worked at the same time on a series of works that kind of culminated into a final piece called Host, which was a 5-channel site-specific piece that deals with another type of pest, especially in the Midwest, called the bean beetle. It's a beetle that eats soybeans, any sort of bean-based crop. It can really destroy your crop. And essentially, these creatures live their entire lives on the bean that they attack. So they lay an egg. The bean beetle itself will eat its way out of the bean. They lay an egg within the bean, and then they eat their way out. So essentially, their entire world and their colony exist on this bean. These are about the size of maybe the tip of a pencil. So they're really small, but incredibly destructive. And it's something that, again, humans spend millions of dollars using pesticides to get rid of every year. And the idea of this installation, it was done in Chicago at the Hyde Park Art Center as a projection that you could see both from the inside and outside of the space. And I chose to do this piece there because on the opposite side of this building, which you'll see, is a huge apartment structure. Like most major cities, we have these sort of huge apartment complexes and living structures. And it was an interesting tie for this sort of living structure and this sort of element in this world to be put against this sort of container across the street, or these containers and living structures across the road. In that we sort of live our existence in these structures, but also on sort of our own big bean, which is the earth. And eventually, all of these colonies will run out of food, and they'll run out of opportunities to eat and reproduce. So there are 5 different stages that are on view for sort of the viewer that start at the beginning in each stage of these beans. And at the end, you see this live projection of them being born in real time, and this explosion of population and sort of the way that they kind of get greedy with one another and eat and eat and eat and reproduce. So thinking about our own sort of host as the planet and our own sort of pest cycle is sort of the point of this piece. So from outside, it was a fairly big projection, and then from inside.
Did you say that's video projection?
Yeah, this is all video projection. So there's only one live channel, and that's the last one. The first 5 are recordings of this last container up to that state, where they started as just a few, and then they've reproduced and reproduced and reproduced, and then this last state is them live in the last frame. It's the frame that's a little bit smaller than everything else on the farthest side. Yeah. I'm also interested, though, in pests and how they organize their societies and how they organize their structures. In 2011, I worked exclusively almost with termites for an entire year and a half, I think, a little more than just a year. And I started looking, at the time I was living in Chicago, and I was looking at this city structure from Google Earth, from topographical sort of views, and then also viewing termite mounds. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the video where they pour concrete into a termite mound and then excavate it out. It's sort of its own massive city that exists. And so I got to thinking about how termites might live if they were forced to sort of live on an etching of our city or of my space. So I was taking different parts of topographical views of Chicago and then laser etching them into wood and seeing if the termites would sort of eat their own new city path into ours, or if they would eat with the sort of rectilinear shapes, or how they might interact with that sort of space, or if they would just avoid it altogether and go underneath and sort of eat the city from below. I was doing this and also watching it on a 24-hour sort of surveillance webcam that you see. But the biggest sort of problem, and I love admitting my own failures in these pieces, is that I can't access a queen, so they're not able to reproduce. So after a while, they would eat certain parts of the map, and then the piece would be over. So the next phase of these pieces is to build a three-dimensional city and see how long it takes them to completely destroy a scale model for them. Not necessarily destroy, I mean, essentially they will, but they'll also be creating a new sort of mapping against our city. So the next version of this is going to be a three-dimensional wood city, hopefully with sort of a queen in place so that it can constantly be repopulated. And before that, like I said, I was doing a lot of tests with sort of proving my theories of them eating paper at all. So it's a pulp-based thing, but termites generally like to eat wood. But because it's pulp-based, they will also eat paper. So this is just a test that I had done before my partnered We Are All Pests piece, where I fed them my birth certificate. And then measured out of those containers with a hydrogen sensor how much hydrogen they produced from eating the first sort of copy of my identity in this country anyway. So I'm worth 2 liters, about 2 liters of hydrogen. So now it's how do I use that? But you could essentially listen to them destroy my birth certificate. And then I'll go through, this is another prototyping platform for proving that they're actually producing hydrogen. So I had wired up a hydrogen gas sensor and put them in this sealed chamber where essentially there was a projection of a visualization of how much hydrogen they're producing on a day-to-day basis. And it projects this map in a more abstract way. It's not a bar graph. It's more of a conceptual graph based on color and size. So this is that piece of text I was telling you about. And this is it. That's all the government shares online about this sort of test. So these were all tests at different structures and how these termites eat these structures and if they would eat these structures. So a lot of my practice also is this sort of hybrid pseudoscience, citizen scientist practice. I don't have a science degree, I'm not a scientist. However, I do collaborate with a lot of scientists and seek their sort of expertise on these projects. I wonder if I can fast forward to the graph. So just for the sake of time, each one of the larger the circle, the more hydrogen that's being produced. So this visualization was happening underneath the termites as you sort of watch them. However, another one of my fun design flaws, they don't crawl well on plastic. So they sometimes would island themselves off into the map. Some can make it across and some can't. So in the next redesign, to figure out a different material that's a little bit more friendly to my collaborators. So you can sort of see that some of them have gotten themselves stuck. You know. But there are a lot more in there than what exists on sort of this top piece of plastic. They live all in this ring of paper that exists outside of that. But you get an idea of these clusters being drawn. So they were drawn in clusters over time, so then you could look at that map and see how much hydrogen they were producing.